the government of South Africa has invoked the Genocide Convention. This is highly significant. There it is. Thanks for getting that up. I don't know if you have anything you want to say about this, Aaron, or what you think about the significance of this invocation.
Well, it's obviously long overdue. This should have happened, months ago, but it's good it's finally happening now. And of course, it's fitting that it comes from South Africa, which, like Israel, was once a U.S. client state whose crimes were protected by the U.S. And South Africa, having liberated itself from that, knows a lot about apartheid and living under a supremacist regime. So good for them for taking the leadership, finally, the moral leadership, and invoking international law to protect the people of Gaza from this genocidal regime. And again, and there's another historical overlap here in that Israel was a key supporter of the apartheid regime in South Africa, especially when the U.S. wasn't able to provide all the support to the apartheid regime that it wanted to because of public criticism and oversight. It got Israel to do the dirty work for it, as Israel did all around the world for the U.S. when it needed to evade scrutiny. So really symbolic and important that South Africa is taking this measure.
Yeah, actually, fun fact, Arnon Milchan, who is one of the most famous Mossad agents, who ran a studio in Hollywood called Regent Studios, where he employed and mentored the future Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid, helped South Africa get nuclear technology through the nuclear technology that Israel obtained.
Yes.
Israel's very, very sorry that South Africa is no longer an apartheid state. They work together very closely. They shared a lot of values, and Israel is anachronistic in history as the last real apartheid state implementing genocide in order to preserve its own ethnic purity. That's exactly what's happening right now. So the moral force of this invocation by South Africa is highly significant. It's an 84-page document. It came out like 2 hours ago, so I haven't had a chance to. I'm probably not going to read all 84 pages. It's not going to happen. I never I don't read the full all the legal filings against Trump either. I'm like, what's Michael Tracy going to say about this? Because it gets really exhausting. I think we're going to see more and more legal filings against Israel in the future, and this will be necessary from third-party countries. I'm thinking of Latin American countries, and I think the most important country to sign on would be Brazil, that I could see possibly signing on. But smaller countries like Bolivia, Cuba, Nicaragua, the leftist countries in Latin America should sign on, because that will create more pressure for this inquiry at the International Court of Justice, or the World Court, which is more open and has a long-standing investigation of Israel pending, unlike the ICC, which has been completely controlled by the United States through Karim Khan. And we've talked about this a lot at the Grayzone. I've reported on it, how Karim Khan issued an indictment for Vladimir Putin for evacuating ethnically Russian children from the war zone to the Russian Federation on the grounds that he's stealing all these children. And then when Israel comes around and commits the most blatant, brazen genocide of our times, he goes to Israel and meets with October 7th victims, October 7th survivors. That's what Karim Khan does. Yeah. But what this will do, if the ICJ and when the ICJ takes this case on, is it will force the ICC to acknowledge the case, and it will force the issue and the language of genocide into the mainstream. As Sam Husseini, our friend, the DC-based independent journalist, has been saying, as he's been clamoring for countries to take this on, is that it will force the mainstream media to grapple with the issue of genocide in the Gaza Strip. So I think, it's important morally, legally, and in terms of forcing the issue into the media.
Yeah, let me read a bit from South Africa's submission, they say that Israel, since October 7th, has failed to prevent genocide and has failed to prosecute the direct and public incitement to genocide. Israel is engaging in, and risks further engaging in genocidal acts against the Palestinian people in Gaza. So, invoking the Genocide Convention, after the recent anniversary, by the way, of the Genocide Convention, I believe 75 years, to try to stop what's going on. It's hugely significant. And again, just the fact that South Africa, which liberated itself from apartheid, is doing this, it shows really where the moral leadership of the world is. The Biden administration loves to brag about how it leads everybody, how it united everybody to back its proxy war in Ukraine, which is not even true. A whole lot of countries oppose what the U.S. did. But on this issue especially, the U.S. is virtually alone in backing Israel's genocide, and now South Africa is standing up to it.
Yes. South Africa, which just hosted the BRIC summit, which we covered, Anya Parampil covered for us, and represents the disruption and possible breaking of the U.S. financial stranglehold on the world economic system, on dollar hegemony. I think this case represents a glacial shift in the international legal architecture and the attempt by the collective West, and specifically the U.S., to dominate every multilateral institution in order to protect itself and Israel specifically. One institution they've sought to dominate and control would be the OPCW, which you talk about all the time, Aaron. Here, I mean, it's a clear-cut case. You have a nation which intends to eliminate in whole or part an entire population based on their ethno-religious character, because they do not fit into the so-called Jewish state. And you have clear genocidal intent expressed at the highest levels of Israeli leadership. They're saying what they want to do, whether or not the U.S. media wants to report it or not. I mean, it's amazing how the New York Times or the Washington Post, which has been much better than the Times, will not do an article on what Israeli leaders are saying about what they aim to do in Gaza. It's always kind of alluded to, voluntary transfer. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is like one of the latest iterations of genocidal intent expressed by a very significant figure in Israel. I think this is one of the most grotesquely blatant expressions of genocide. And this is Eliyahu Yosein, who is a veteran of the Unit 8200 cyber division of the Israeli army, which is one of its most important divisions with respect to Gaza. He's saying Hamas doesn't control Gaza. It is not the enemy. Gaza contains Hamas. Hamas is not the enemy. Gaza is the enemy. And as soon as we alter the terminology, the understanding of the situation will change. And the definition of the enemy will be different. The way it's not important who you warn or who evacuates a neighborhood. This is what is called flattening the area, leveling the ground. You asked me what I would do, and the answer is simply leveling the ground and to kill the largest number possible. Because the woman there is an enemy, the baby there is an enemy, and the first grader is an enemy, and the Hamas militant is an enemy, and the pregnant woman is an enemy, because we see with our eyes. Why then could we not absorb Western values? Because they blur basic logic. Because we see a boy carrying chocolate in his hand, yet the same boy will learn how to use a Kalashnikov in the first grade. So that's Israeli logic. That's the Israeli military doctrine. The first grader is an enemy. The grandmother is an enemy. The pregnant woman is an enemy. The baby is an enemy. We must flatten the ground. It is the same logic that was expressed during the early 1980s by the genocidal Guatemalan dictator whose armed forces were trained by Israel, Ephraim Rios Montt, who said that if you can't catch the fish, you must drain the sea. And that is precisely what Israel's saying that it's doing here Western media doesn't want to quote them, though. They're like, oh, they are intensifying strikes against Hamas. When Israel destroyed killed 70 to 80 people in the Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza, I was looking for the headline, Israel kills 70 in one strike, all civilians. There was no headline like that in the Washington Post and the New York Times. It just said Israel intensifies strikes against Hamas. But they're saying in here, this will all be entered as evidence in the ICJ case. So will the expressions of genocidal intent contained in my piece, What is Wrong with Israelis, which you can watch. It's age gated and demonetized at our YouTube channel. It's on our Twitter account where you can still see things that are real. I can't play that piece here because then this live stream will be automatically demonetized, although it'll probably be anyway.
You know, just looking at the hospitals, right? The line that Israel has crossed here and how they've basically normalized something that was previously off limits to everybody, which is systemically attacking hospitals. Now I believe there's 4 hospitals in Gaza that are left operational, 4 out of more than 24, at least. I think there's maybe more than 30 hospitals in Gaza. 4 are left operational. That's unprecedented. When the U.S. bombed that hospital in Afghanistan, in Kunduz, I believe it was called, U.S. sort of said that was a mistake. We didn't mean to do that, which was probably a lie. But the point is, they at least had to own up to it and say it wouldn't happen again. Here, Israel deliberately, methodically attacks hospitals, attacks the people inside, runs over people with bulldozers outside. I mean, every single line has been crossed, and nothing that Israel does is too far for the Biden administration. As the Biden administration said, we have no red lines. Israel can do whatever it wants. It has carte blanche, even to attack hospitals in Gaza, to take them operational. So to not only commit genocide, but make sure that the basic institution required to keep people possibly alive, or save them, treat them, fix their wounds, cannot actually meet people's needs.
This is inside Shifa Hospital in Gaza City on December 26th. Much of the hospital has been destroyed by Israeli raids. The hospital is sort of limping along, and you can see they're treating extremely wounded people on the floor. This footage is courtesy of Gaza's Ministry of Health. Wounded children on the floor, people taking IVs. It's a horror scene. And this is, Israel's denounced the South Africa invocation of the Genocide Convention as blood libel. Are these people not bleeding? Is their blood not real? Are you not doing this? Are you not deliberately targeting civilians, according to one of the most influential people in Unit 8200, who teaches other members of this cybersecurity spying unit, which is involved in all the targeting in Gaza? They're the ones who help determine the targets by spying on residents of the Gaza Strip. Here's a walk through the parts of Shifa Hospital that were destroyed by Israel. Staff on this tour. I mean, these are
people were here.
Yeah.
And they died here.
Intensive care unit, I think. And people were killed here. This is a tank shell.
And the mosque was hit as well.
Some people were there.
And you can see the Al Rimal neighborhood around. It's almost entirely destroyed.
6 people died downstairs.
Yes.
And people were hit here. Okay. We need to go. I'm sorry.
I mean, this is an entire wing of the hospital. All because they said there were Hamas tunnels under the hospital.
This is unbelievable.
This was signed off on by Tony Blinken and the State Department.
Yeah, on the last stream, we covered this, how the Biden administration laundered these lies for Israel about a Hamas command center underneath the hospital. And again, it has to be said, even if that were true, it still wouldn't justify Israel firing a single bullet at the hospital. They don't have the right to fire a single bullet into Gaza to begin with. They only have the obligation to end the occupation. But putting that aside, it wasn't even true. There was no Hamas command center under Al-Shifa. It was a complete lie. The Biden administration pushed it. U.S. media stenographers in the New York Times and elsewhere laundered it for them. And now everyone's just forgotten about that. They've moved on to the next talking point to justify the atrocity. And, look, there's so many things to discuss on all these issues, but just watching this footage and thinking about how unprecedented this is to have this coordinated campaign of attacking hospitals, like the one time I went to Gaza and from speaking to people from Gaza, Max, I'm curious your thoughts on this. They're very proud of their hospital system. They're very proud of how many doctors they trained, how even under occupation, under a siege, they're able to have a functioning healthcare system that trains people, that educates people. People from Gaza many people could go live abroad and make a higher salary and have a decent life, but they've chosen to go and stay in Gaza and serve their people. And Israel, I feel, along with just trying to just, kill as many people as they can, is also just trying to destroy the culture, the spirit, the resilience of these people, the pride they have in their homeland and its healthcare system.
Well, that is essential to Israel's military strategy in the Gaza Strip, is destroying all the institutions, they're killing doctors. They've killed over 4,000 students. That's a statistic I just saw from Gaza's Ministry of Health. We've talked about Rifat al-Arir. Many prominent intellectuals in Gaza are being killed. This strategy really came into being, the strategy of targeting the intelligentsia and institutions towards the end of the 2014 Operation Protective Edge assault on the Gaza Strip, when that area of Al-Rimal and the middle class areas of Gaza City came under attack for absolutely no reason, like the Zafar Tower, which was known as Fatah City because so many people affiliated with Fatah who are not Hamas, who were middle class, that was taken down. The Italian compound, another tower of prominent people, was taken down, 30 stories. Hundreds of families lost their homes. And it was a message, and they were saying, even if you live there, if you do not take on Hamas and remove them, we're just going to take you all out. And that was a message for next time, because everyone knew on the Palestinian side, on the Israeli side, that the 51-day war in 2014 was simply a prelude to a much bigger war. And this war will not be the last, this one we're witnessing now, because of the amount of destruction. Unless there's a proper resolution, the amount of destruction in Gaza will lead to another war. And it provides no other infrastructure beyond the summer camps Hamas runs for children, the Al-Qassam brigades that provide a structure for youth who've lost their entire families, for young men. There's nothing else left. And if they eradicate that, what will be left? Some kind of nihilistic ISIS-like entity? I don't even know what will be left. So this is all part of Israel's strategy. You're right. And Gaza had its medical system was always under attack. The last time I was there was a strike because the Palestinian Authority refused to authorize funding because of a dispute with Hamas to the hospitals. So Shifa Hospital had all this medical waste piling up outside its dialysis room for kidney patients. And they were just getting volunteers to come in, guys from the street, out of the goodness of their hearts, to clean up medical waste. But 96% of the Gaza Strip, there's a 96% literacy rate. People take schooling and education very, very seriously. Their grades are called out from the mosques at the end of every semester of all the kids. Yeah. And education is paramount. Whereas Israelis portray people in Gaza as, stupid people who are ignorant terrorists. They don't have any contact with them. So how would they know? And that's part of the dehumanization. And yeah, I mean, when we talk about the destruction of institutions that took place this was in phase one of Israel's war on Gaza. The war is phased in 3 parts, according to Israel. We're now in phase 2. So phase 1, they called it a success because they managed to occupy the north of Gaza, destroy the main institutions of Hamas government, which was simply Gaza's government. and they've created what they kind of call a buffer zone. It's not a real victory. It's a Pyrrhic victory. And from a military standpoint, when Israeli media announces, for example, a strategic hold in Shujaiya, which is the real power base of the Al-Qassam brigades and their tunnel network, they're still taking hits there. They're still taking bodies there. The strategy of Al-Qassam and the other resistance factions is not to hold territory. It's to bleed the occupying force. So then you have the middle of Gaza. They're starting to move there now. That's why this Maghazi camp massacre took place. They're starting to attack the people in the areas where they told the people from the north to go. And they're creating pressure there through massacres to start to push them even further south towards Khan Yunis and Rafah. Israeli forces are now east of Khan Yunis in an area that's always intensely contested during military confrontation since 2014 called Hosea. They're taking a lot of casualties, the Israelis are. There's intense fighting there. They believe that Hamas leadership is concentrated in Khan Yunis. They're stepping up bombing, killing lots of people, and they're starting to hit Rafah, which is where many of the new refugee camps, where you see people sleeping in tents in the open in the rain, that's where much of the population has been pushed. So they think that in phase 2, they can start to actually push into Khan Yunis with their tanks and start actually pursuing their fantasy of capturing Yahya Sinwar, the prime minister, and breaking open all these tunnel networks. But the real objective is not to go after Hamas. They're going after the civilian population. And what they want to do is push them all further south. And then in phase 3 is a total attack on the civilian population that's trapped in the south. And Israel will likely declare a buffer zone in this area called the Philadelphia Corridor. You probably know about that. I remember back in the day at Democracy Now!, they always used to report on Israel's, one of the only networks then, reporting on Israel's occupation of this area between Gaza's Rafah city and the Egyptian side, the Philadelphia Corridor. That's where Rachel Corrie was killed. The bulldozers were taking out all the homes there. That's when they created that corridor. So if the Israeli military gets there again, they can trap the Palestinian population there and put political pressure on Egypt and say, you're all dying. You need to get out to Egypt. We're only going to let this happen if you take hundreds of thousands of people. And then they start to drain the sea because they couldn't catch the fish. And they assume that Hamas will be drained as well because they are the people, they're among the people. So the strategy in this 3-tiered military assault on Gaza, which has not achieved its objectives yet, the strategy is genocide. And we need to see it for what it is. The hospitals are key to that because without the hospitals, there's no way of anyone getting treatment unless they go out to Egypt.